Now we go towards the second part of the evening, very exciting second part. I am passing the microphone very soon to Dr. Connell, but who will properly introduce Dr. Brera tonight. But before getting there, I just wanted to say one thing. We're very happy and lucky to have Dr. Matteo Brera with us. Dr. Connell will explain. He's a wonderful scholar who has chosen Seton Hall to house as a house for his research, and his research is extremely fascinating and interesting. As you will hear very soon, it will speak about newspapers written in the Italian language in the southern part of the United States at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. Now, I know that I'm getting old because I think I'm one of fewer and fewer people reading newspaper every day. You know, I wake up in the morning and I can't even leave the house until I've read an Italian newspaper, the newspaper of Philadelphia where I live, and then I give another quick look at another newspaper. I think there's a strong connection. I see a strong connection. The way that the role that newspaper, especially back then when there was no social media, there was no television, you know, there was a sense of not only of communication, but of community that the newspaper provided to immigrants who came in this country and trying to find a new identity, trying to find a place in the new world. Newspaper in Italian today, I think they're, maybe Matteo can tell us more about that. There are not that many. La Voce di New York, I'm aware in New York. I don't know if there are any other in the United States that still publish articles in the Italian language. I'm just going to stop here. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask Professor Connell to properly introduce Matteo Brera. But please join me because I'm so happy that Professor Brera is with us at Seton Hall. It's such a treat for us to have a scholar of that caliber. So please join me in welcoming Matteo Brera, that you will listen very soon speak. It's all yours, Bill.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I am not Matteo, but he'll be up here. He'll be here in a minute. We're celebrating today our students and their families, their parents, and the donors, the generous donors who've made possible these scholarships for them. I'd like to say that Dr. Brera represents another dimension of our Italian Studies program that's really continues to grow. We were charged when the program was established about 25 years ago. We were told that both by donors and by Monsignor Sheeran, the president, Seton Hall can't be good in everything, but we should be able to be good in Italian studies. We have a great basketball team, but we don't have a football team. And it's a tribute to the support that we've had from donors, from the community, from those of you who come to our events regularly, that we've had such success. But there's this other dimension that Dr. Brera represents. I see Dean Bushman from the library here. We have a marvelous resource in the Valente Italian Library on the third floor. It's the largest library in the United States that in the sense of putting all of its Italian collection together in one place in the library. If you go to Princeton, you'll find many more books on Italy and so forth, but they're scattered from the top of the building to the basement. We have instead together the biographical dictionaries, the history, the literature, the art, the music, all in one spot for Italian and Italian-American culture. And that's a really great achievement that we've been working very hard to advance. And Dr. Romani spoke to newspapers. And you'll hear more about newspapers from Dr. Brera. But we also have ongoing within the library an effort to digitize Italian newspapers from this area, including the Italian Tribune and the Italian Voice. The Italian Tribune published in Newark and now in Bloomfield, and the Italian Voice from Patterson. So there's a local dimension, and then a national dimension with the Deep South, and then finally an international dimension, because our resources are so strong here. Our library is such a magnet that we've been able to host visiting scholars from Spain, from the University of Parma, from Durham University in England, and recently we had a Fulbright scholar from the University of Messina here. So we're really attracting attention on a national and international scope while serving our local community and our local students. Now, let me introduce Dr. Brera, a holder of multiple degrees from the universities of Pavia, Edinburgh, and Utrecht. Matteo Brera is the Marie Curie Global Research Fellow at the University of Padua and Seton Hall University. This is his tenure here of 2 years is a partnership with the University of Padua. He previously worked in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Canada at the University of Toronto, and in the US, where he directed the Center for Italian Studies at Stony Brook University. He specializes on the transnational exchanges between Italy and North America, that is Canada, and in particular the American South, the Deep South. And his Marie Curie research project is titled The Darker Shade of Whiteness, the Italian Ethnic Press in Louisiana and the Making of Racial Awareness in the Gulf South. His work is positioned in an intersection between diaspora studies, the hierarchization of racism memory, and the construction of racial discourse, and it's relevant to current understandings of race migrations and public discourse, exploring this under-researched aspect of American history and of Italian-American history. So let me pass or invite to the microphone Dr. Matteo Brera.
All right, thank you, everyone. I tried to put the other microphone on, but I failed miserably, fell apart on me. So I just, that's why I focus on newspapers and old stuff. So, I mean, I'm much more familiar with those. So thank you, everyone, for having me here, first and foremost. Thank you, Bill, for, because you told the audience that I chose Seton Hall. Yeah, but Seton Hall took me on board. So thank you for that. And so thank you to Gabriella, thank you to you, Bill, to Barbara, who takes care of my daily needs in the department, and also to David Beneteau, who's not here tonight because he's away to Boston, and thanks to the university at large, of course, and congratulations to the students whose achievements we are celebrating tonight. And don't forget to and congratulations also to the families, and never forget to say thank you to your families, by the way, because they are the ones who actually make this possible. So, so a round of applause should go to the families as well. Now, as per my talk tonight, it's complicated because Marie Curie is a big project to get. I'm not bragging or anything, but it's a complex machinery, that of the European Commission, to get accustomed to and to crack and to manage to get a grant of this type is complicated. Now, I want to start from the title of the project. I don't know if any of you, I believe probably the answer would be yes here, is familiar with the Procolarum. Remember the musical band? A Whiter Shade of Pale?
Oh, yes.
Remember that? Well, that's what inspired the title. It has nothing to do with that, but it created a beautiful, in my opinion, acronym, that show, okay? Darker Shade of Whiteness. You need an acronym to enter the competition of the Marie Curie. And I thought, well, this sounds good. And a darker shade of whiteness meant something in terms of the racial landscape of the US South and the Italians who tried to negotiate their racial standing in it. Tonight, I will go through some initial findings, which are not maybe findings, big findings, because we'll go through a case that is probably familiar with most of you, which is the Hennessy case, you know, the killing of Superintendent Police Chief David Hennessy, and what it triggered, namely the lynchings of 1891. But we'll have a look at how the lynchings and what happened in the immediate aftermath of them were treated in the public discourse. And I'll also illustrate, before we get there, what the project is about, what the deliverables, and what we are meant to be achieving at the end of it will be. This is our website, by the way. Maybe we can have a quick look at it. I mean, we're just about to launch it. It's not really there yet, but we are working steadily on it. There's also a section, and this is quite, I think this is quite interesting in terms of where the project wants to go. This is a project on newspapers, essentially. A very perishable type of document, mostly printed on acidic paper. That means, you know, they don't last long. And we all knew, well, I mean, when we use newspapers, when you read newspaper, after we've read them, what do? All sorts of things with them. You know, my grandmother used to wrap eggs up into them, right? People use them to, you know, for other needs. In general, you know, are documents that are difficult to be found. So when a few years back I bumped into several runs of newspapers of La Voce Coloniale and L'Italo Americano published between 1894. L'Italo Americano is in fragments at times. You know, you'll see some of those newspapers. I thought there's something to do here, mostly in terms of preservation of these documents. I wanted to show you a couple of things here, okay? This is probably the main goal, you know, the overarching goal of it all, to preserve this document. John Bushman is here, and I have news for you, actually. This morning, you know, we got this, you know, in a jewelry-like box. You know, it came from Birmingham, Alabama, so it's the Gladiatore, is one of the newspapers in a USB drive, digitized and ready to be put online, because what we are doing with John and the libraries is to create an online repository of what's left, which is quite a lot for the South. I mean, for New Orleans, we started with New Orleans. I started with New Orleans. The project started there. 2 newspapers, L'Italo Americano, 1894, La Voce Coloniale, published when L'Italo Americano was still running. The 2 were actually antagonistic at times, you know, as newspapers can be. And then the Voce Coloniale took over. And today, I believe, Gabriella, it's still running under a different name, and it's a trilingual newspaper: Spanish, Italian, and English. So it's an interesting product, editorial product, which is still going in paper and digital format. Now, I can't recall exactly what the title is, but you know, it came to me. But the project, you know, soon, you know, deborded, you know, overflew. As it usually happens, you know, you research and you find new stuff. And I did. I found other periodicals, I would say, not only newspapers. L'Aquila, fascist periodical L'Aquila. You can imagine the symbology, the mental symbology is there already. The Columbus Balbo Review, again, published in the 30s. When Mussolini took power, obviously the Italian communities reacted mostly in support of of Mussolini, and new publications stemmed out of that support. It was a brief support, just right before the, well, certainly before the racial laws, but even in the immediate aftermath of the conquest of the empire by Mussolini in 1935, strong doubts emerged in US communities, US Italian-American communities, and the support to Mussolini quickly faded away. But these years, the 1930s, were central to the production of periodicals, newspapers, and journals among Italian-American communities. I found one superstat copy of the Italian-American Citizen, Memphis, Tennessee. One copy is in Minneapolis. It will join the repository, so it will be there. La Voce dello Schiavo, Tampa, Florida. This is a esce quando può. You see, this was the it comes out when it can. You know, it was an anarchic. It was an anarchist periodical. Okay, there were a few of those. You know, in support of workers' rights mostly, but soon became anarchist. So this is where we are at the moment. Some more newspapers might come out. You never know. Let's get back to the beginning, because, well, this is the project. This is what we're trying to do in scholarly terms. I won't be bothering you much with two scholarly aspects of the project, but this is what I'm trying to do, using the newspaper to do what, apart from preserving them, to studying the public discourse that stems from them, okay? Studying how these periodicals show in the public the reaction of the Italian communities to the nativist press. They will probably focus a bit more on the nativist press, talking about the Hennessy case, but there's already some interesting cases emerging from this preliminary research, and not that preliminary. I mean, we are a year into the project, so some preliminary findings are already there to be exhibited. But the most important thing, which will end up in a book at the end of the whole thing, is to show what the rhetorical strategies and practical strategies, because we will see there's not just newspapers in this project. There's other, many other types of text. Okay, it's not only the printed text we have to focus on. There's a few more things, and I'll give you one or two examples here tonight. But the focus will be on the rhetorical strategies that the communities of Louisiana and the other states, nearby states of the South, negotiated the racial standing between two key years. I mean, we're doing history here, so we have to find dates. We have to find key dates. They periodize what we are working on. The choice went to 1877, the end of the Reconstruction, and the beginning of the civil rights movement in 1945, and the end of World War II. So we're lucky that the two things went kind of together. What kind of South? Now, this is one of the newspapers, the Gladiatore, just freshly arrived out of the oven this morning. 1927, the Gladiatore starts before the fascist regime. It's also, these newspapers are also very interesting to measure the level of adhesion, of support of the Italian-American communities to Mussolini's regime. Okay, you see how they communicated before, what kind of rhetoric they adopted, less aggressive, of course, before the regime took over. Okay, and how it developed as Mussolini took power and became more and more influential for the local Italians in the U.S. South. There's not, as I said, we started with Louisiana, but it soon became apparent, taken as a rationale for this, the way in which these newspapers, as soon as I found them, I realized that they were not only focusing on their own parish, their own state, their own city. They were communicating in a way There were articles about what was going on in an Alabama paper. There would be something about what was going on further down south in Louisiana and vice versa. Okay? After big events like the lynchings, we'll see that in a bit, the echo of what happened down south arrived everywhere through the press, through the migrant press. Gabriella said something incredibly true. These were the social media of the time. Well, these have been the social media of our times in general. I mean, probably only the left wing, the extreme left wing of students there don't have a different relationship with newspapers. But I think we all can say that we used the newspapers as our social media. Okay. These newspapers show ties between one another, okay? And that's how I made the connections, and I extended, and I'm still expanding the area of investigation, if possible, and when applicable. So this is one of them, Il Gladiatore. See, their appearance was very, very basic. It was very, very basic. These are all flaking off. They're very fragile, but thankfully, we managed to save them. I forgot to say that this, and John and all the other academics in this room, of course, know that, one of the main obstacles to salvage these artifacts or these publications is money. You know, we often need money to do this, and thankfully, the Marie Curie grants are quite generous, and it's possible to salvage them all through digitization, thanks to this. So the European Commission is often beleaguered by politicians and all that, but you know they do a very good job for us and for the preservation of invaluable cultural products. And I also have to say that the Marie Curie grant is one of the very few grants in the world that gives everyone the same kind of possibility. It's very, very democratic. So there's no more grants for pure scientists like doctors, chemists, and that, you know, humanists have the same chance of getting a grant of the same value of the others. So it's a good thing to know about this grant, which is not really which is yet to be fully discovered, I think, in the United States, because the global fellowships are very few in number. That's one of the issues. Now, let's get into the, so we expanded the area of investigation. So we were up into Tennessee, Jolton, Tennessee, north of Nashville, where 80 people from Udine settled randomly in 1880, according to the Dillingham Commission report. Are you familiar with the Dillingham Commission report? Yeah. I'm just asking. Maybe someone knows everything already and helps me. The Dillingham Commission report. The Dillingham Commission report was published in 1911. Okay, it was the Congress put together a commission to study the trends, the immigration trends, in order to do what would happen right next. Stop the immigration into the United States. That was the final, the objective, the main aim of the Dillingham Commission report. The Dillingham Commission report had to examine from north to south the immigration trends in the United States of America and give the Congress a final report that would make recommendations about whether or not to continue to support mass immigration into the United States. Okay? From the Dillingham report, well, we often talk about Dillingham bias or Dillingham flaw. The Dillingham flaw is to consider races based on stereotypes, and this is what the commissioners openly did. When you read the Dillingham report, it's a collection of stereotypes. Professor Connell is a scholar who's been focusing and working on stereotypes for a good chunk of his career, and he knows that in here it's a gold mine. The Dillingham report is a gold mine. This is one of the abstracts of the report of the Commission. Okay, and this is what they say about the the Italians, the Italian races, of course. It's not only the Italian race, but the Italian races. There's also some geographical, very, very interesting geographical thing that would probably generate some kind of issue for even for the most staunch northerner and a supporter of the Lega Nord in Italy. As you see, they say that Liguria even is in the south. So there's a complete imbalance. You know, if you look at the map of Italy, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Liguria certainly isn't a southern region. But according to the Dillinger Commission report, it was. And this is what the commissioner said and thought about the Italians. There's no trace, I have to say, at the beginning of the Italians as being regarded as blacks, okay? Which is something that is typical of the South. It comes from there mostly, and it comes from the South in the post-Reconstruction era, when slavery, of course, being abolished, opens up the proverbial can of worms, okay? Where slavery has to be somehow substituted, you know, with something else. And that's when Italians, being of a different perceived color, at least the South, those coming from Italy, from Sicily mostly, okay? Sicily was a land of great immigration, become a surrogate of the manpower that was lost by southern states after the abolition of slavery. In the documents, there's no much, in the Dillingham report, at least at the beginning. I mean, there's differences, there's stereotypes of this kind, but as you see, the Italians are still seen desirable immigrants to have in the United States, okay? They drink less than the Irish, they said. This is another thing. They're more reliable because they drink less. They only drink wine. They don't drink spirits. They don't drink spirits, so they don't get drunk on the job, right? And it's true. I mean, I'm not joking too much. But this is the thing. Now we have a need to study newspapers because when we talk about immigration, there's displacement on the one side. On the other, there's a need to re-territorialize, to get to a new place and to find a new home. Now, the new home can be an actual home, a physical home, right, made of what mostly labor historians study. This is a strawberry picker in Hammond, Louisiana. But the physical re-territorialization is not the only one that we can study. We can also study newspapers as a form, a means of cultural re-territorialization, which is not secondary. The two things usually go together, okay? The displacement has to be at some point overcome, and oftentimes newspapers offered another way of dealing with the new reality. And it's in this way they created a paper territoriality, a paper homeland, okay? A paper homeland by either rejecting the new reality and manufacturing a completely new one, a fictitious one, okay? A fictitious present, a fictitious past, okay? Based on myths. This is what happens maybe, perhaps during Mussolini's regime. They erase, you know, what's bad about Mussolini's regime, and they recreate a fictional Italy away from Italy, with all the goods that they perceive about the regime, forgetting about what was going on there that they couldn't see and therefore didn't exist, or maybe they were familiar with poverty, famine, and all that, but they decided not to mention. In fact, well, this is 1935. We are just right after the conquest of Ethiopia. Nobile adesione pro patria, noble adhesion in favor of the homeland by the Italians of New Orleans and Louisiana. okay? So it's pure propaganda at this point, okay? It could also be that newspapers create a new paper territoriality mediating ethnic and racial differences. So trying to become more adherent to the new society, the new societies they came to contact with. This happens in Alabama, I would say, where the racial situation was a bit different from Louisiana. In Alabama, the city of Birmingham around the 20s, late in the 20s, became, an important center for the production of steel. Lots of Italians ended up there. There was a massive community from Bisaquino, Sicily. They founded the Gladiatore, which you saw before. But it was a strange society because the Italians were not regarded as not being white per se, but they were frowned upon by the local whites because they dealt economically with the black population. They had mom and pop stores, and they would dare to give credit to the African Americans. Therefore, the whites did not see them as purely white because of that. Okay, so the Gladiatore was a way to, in fact, it was published in the interest of the Italian, in the financial interest of the Italian colony, because it was a way for the Italians to tell the whites, look, we are offering you our services as well, not only to them. That's how they managed to come to terms with these differences. Consider that in the city of West Blockton, Alabama, what was called Dago City was in the middle, okay? Birmingham is built on one side of the Red Mountain, iron extraction site, okay? The African-American communities were basically in the mud, on the side, attached to the side of the mountain. I'm talking about the early development of Birmingham, of course. On the main roads, there were the whites. The Italians were physically in between. So the Dago City was physically in between the city of the African Americans and the city of the whites. So this was the situation. So there was a need of meddling, racially speaking, and the Gladiatore offered that type of support. The Italians became, for financial reasons, reliable for both communities. Some newspapers occupy the political space. This is La Voce Coloniale. I should have put there another issue of La Voce Coloniale before 1922, before Mussolini came to power, or even before 1924 when Mussolini killed Giacomo Matteotti. La Voce Coloniale was openly against Mussolini in 1924. L'orribile delitto di Matteotti, the horrible killing of Matteotti, the La Voce Coloniale titles. In 1935, they're fully adherent, they're fully supporting the fascist cause. So things change quite a lot. And then, as we said before, there's also anarchist, socialist papers, such as La Voce dello Schiavo, the voice of the slave. So it's also quite evocative, right? Or, in the end, and there's many more, they could be all together at times, okay, and they will change over time. Newspapers can assert racial and ethnic identity. And this is what we have in some of them. Now here, we're back to the slide we saw before. This is L'Italo Americano. This is the oldest newspaper that we have in the collection, as you can tell. Right? It's not in very good shape. It's in fragments. One is here. The other one is down there, 1894. Okay, so it's 3 years after the lynchings. It's a long time ago. There's another dimension I didn't talk about much as far as the project is concerned, and that's the public history component of it. What are we trying to do is to put together a small historical markers program. Now, historical markers are, well, it's something like this. This needs a bit of attention, as you may see. It's in West Blockton, Alabama, where there's a cemetery, an Italian Catholic cemetery. You'll see one artifact belonging to it in a minute. This is the old parish prison on Tremes Street. It's not there anymore in Louisiana, where the lynchings of 1891 took place. The idea is to put one marker there to remember what happened in 1891, to try and get this one back in shape. This is Primo Bartolini, the marker for Primo Bartolini, who was a champion of integration, poet, patriot, living in Nashville, Tennessee, has been approved and will be planted in the springtime of 2025. So that we're already there with one of those, but it's important to remember the public history component, not only the preservation and of course the offering to the public of digitized newspapers, but also permanent and public component that will stay there forever to remember what was there in the past. I talked about different texts, not only newspaper. This is a tomb. It's a tombstone in West Blockton, Alabama, a Catholic cemetery, Italian Catholic cemetery. This is the translation, rough translation of the tombstone of Elisabetta Castelli, killed by, of course, pardon the language, of course, is due to the fact that we're talking about historical text and moments. So obviously there's the odd offensive nowadays and back then language. So Elisabetta Castelli was in her mom and pop store, and she was attacked, according to a news report, by an assassin, a murderer of the Negro race in the morning at 8 o'clock on December 15, 1902. The assassin was, Ed Walker, was immediately caught and hanged almost on the spot. The other one was taken away by the Whitecaps and never appeared again. But this to say that this the crime and ethnic matters often go together in these areas, and this is one of the first findings of the project, especially both in newspapers, in news treatment, especially cases of an African American attacking a white woman, a white Italian woman, is a case that is recurring in this history that we are examining. And there's also another recurring and overarching theme, the one of the malavita, okay, the one of the mafia, okay, that will get intersects the history of Italian Americans for a long time in history. The malavita that comes from this book, La Malavita di Palermo, okay, by former police officer Antonino Cutrera. That explains, how after the unification of Italy, banditism and the outlaw became, a feature of the Italian society, the young Italian society, the mafia and Southern Italy. Here, I'll try to go as quick as I can because these are things that you probably already know. But this is at the root of Italian immigration. Okay, this is actually an illustration in the Illustrated American, 1890. Okay, southern villages were left in Italy to their own destiny, to their own fate, and that's why many people left Italy and immigrated to the United States, and not only. Farmers, especially farmers and tenants, sought protection from capi mafiosi instead of the state, of the government, in which they completely lost faith. So there was an actual transfer of power between the government and what we will then come to know as the mafia. Okay, because being a mafia affiliate could give you a job. Without that, you just had to either succumb or try to leave. Not that the mafia people didn't, never emigrated. Actually, they did. And most of them actually immigrated to New Orleans. There was New Orleans was a great port of entry, one of the two main port of entries in the US after Ellis Island, of course. It was the main port of the South. Well, these are things that you, of course, know, but the Italians of New Orleans arrived in New Orleans well before the Civil War. Not all of them were mafiosi, of course, or criminals. 900 residents were in the Bayou State by 1850, so well before the unification, okay? And it was actually the largest number in the State of the Union. By 1890, so 30 years roughly after the unification, 15,000, almost 20,000 at some point, Southern Italians lived in New Orleans. Among them, there was all sorts of people. Not only criminals, but most of them were employed in fruit peddling activities back home. They couldn't find a job, and they just emigrated to the United States. Why New Orleans? Why New Orleans? And I would say why the surrounding states, especially the south of Alabama and the Mississippi Delta, because there were similarities in weather. The climate were very similar. The two climates were very similar, so they would find the right place to go in order to be able to do what they did at home, to do the same kind of farming they did at home. And in fact, soon enough, a little Palermo was established. It was actually called the Little Palermo. The French Quarter was what is now known as the French Quarter, used to be the Sicilian Quarter. Within the Sicilian Quarter, there was the Little Palermo. These are the stores used to be down there. Typical Italian fruit stand. Okay. There were many success stories. This is the Hotel Monteleone. Okay, if you ever been to New Orleans, and if you go to New Orleans, and the Hotel Monteleone is right in the middle of the French Quarter. Okay, this is the Maqueca building on Canal Street. Maqueca was a fruit importer, the king of bananas. Yeah. It was. Yeah. It was one of the people who were lynched actually in the 1891 incidents. Not only success stories, but lots of anti-Italian biases. The mascot of New Orleans was probably the most aggressive magazine attacking the Italians. You see, these are very famous vignettes, especially this one, the result of encouraging immigration. Remember what I told you about the Dillingham Commission report. The objective at some point becomes to limit mass immigration because there was this kind of propaganda, the anti-immigration propaganda in general, not only anti-Italian, I would say. This is one of the criminals that certainly arrived in New Orleans. Giuseppe Esposito was specialized in kidnapping prominence, especially British entrepreneurs down in Sicily. He got caught a couple of times with the Carabinieri. He managed to escape a couple of times and immigrated to New Orleans in 1879. In New Orleans, found a similar fate to the same he found in Italy. 1881, he gets arrested by Mike and Dave Hennessy, and we get to our point. Who killed the chief? This was the question. This was the question, a derogatory type of question that many Italians of New Orleans were asked in order to get mocked. They were mocked through this question. Okay, who killed the chief? Okay, Dave Hennessy was killed in 1891. Okay, but before that, he was a very shady character. It was a very shady character. It was the Hennessy family was one of those families where there's something going on all the time. Okay, his father was killed. The two brothers had a turbulent life, and then in post-reconstruction, Louisiana found a job in the force, which was not a particularly good thing to do at the times in a Confederate state, now under the control of the Union. So Hennessy was never seen as a positive character in New Orleans, but it was at some point he becomes the chief of police. And in 1891 he gets killed. Okay, in very, very strange, mysterious circumstances. He's killed on October 15th. 1891 at 11:30 p.m. There's no witnesses, nothing. But Hennessy says this to Captain William O'Connor: Dagos gave it to me. Dagos killed me. And this changes everything. In history, on the line of history, there's points where, something changes forever. This is probably one of them. Italians, before this, in New Orleans, they weren't particularly mistreated or, attacked or, they weren't liked in general as immigrants. But this changed everything. This changed everything to the point, well, of course, if you want to know more, and you probably know more already, I mean, there's also a film made of the Hennessy case and the Hennessy killing and what came after, but we can get back to this later. Hennessy is killed, the aftermath of the crime. Times Democrat, okay? Major Shakespeare orders to find the culprit. More than 100 arrests were made. Soon enough, the parish prison is filled with Sicilians. Whose low, receding foreheads, repulsive countenances, and slovenly attire proclaim their brutal natures. This is Cesare Lombroso, plain and simple, okay? Positive school of criminology. The description of the delinquent man, okay? So they have this type, this physical form, this physical shape. They must be criminals, Sicilians. The equation is complete. And after all, on his deathbed, Hennessy said that the Dagos gave it to me, so it must be them, okay? And then again, the press, unless the assassins of Chief Hennessy are captured, tried and punished, the victory is theirs. They will hold a constant threat over the community. Of course, the rhetoric of fear, okay? And whoever interferes with them will be killed. New Orleans must surrender to the mafia and vendetta, if not, get rid of them, okay? And the New Orleans side, of course, continues. The mafia had continued before. The mafia is a state within the state whose laws assure of execution the decrees of the state. Now, what happens at the trial? They're all acquitted. Spoiler alert. They're all acquitted. Lots of them are taken to court. Judge Baker presiding. Lionel Adams, former DA, is defending the Italians. So a white former DA is defending the Italians. There's no trace of blackness here or anything like that. The Italians are defended by probably the highest in grade of the attorneys in the whole of New Orleans. There's the sense around that they needed a culprit. They wanted to find it in the Italian community, mostly for economic reasons. The Italians had basically in their hands the port of New Orleans. Maqueca was the bananas king. So the nativist whites needed the reason to get the Italians out of the port of New Orleans. The juror selection took days, 12 days, because they needed to find someone who wasn't of Italian descent and someone who hadn't anti-Italian biases. 12 days of selection of jurors. These are the original papers. The outcome of the proceeding, all of the defendants are, if not acquitted, certainly mistried. The problem is the judge does not free them, sends them back to prison. 150 people gather a clay statue. A mob comes up and come prepared for action. You see the Times Democrat, 1891, mass meeting is announced, okay, with the clear intent to get rid of the Italians one way or another. So make justice where justice failed, basically. We want the Dagos. This is what emerges from the press. Okay, an execution squad led by city leaders kills 11 of the Italians, and this is what we have in the press, the New Orleans Tribune of the 15th of March. Okay, they're all mistried, not tried. Some of them were not even tried because in the parish prison there were 19 Italian prisoners. Okay, the warden sets them free, said, just try to hide wherever you can. Try to hide wherever you can. They couldn't do much. Some of them escaped, but 11 were killed, and some of them were not even tried. Okay, demons loose in New Orleans here. Okay, this is the Times Democrat. Even the local press, the nativist press, uses tones that are not particularly positive of their own. Demons loose in New Orleans. Certainly, this is the mob, of course, not the Italians. Okay. And then, of course, the wretched Sicilian band butchered. Okay, they return to a more normal rhetorical pattern for them. The Italian press, okay, L'Eco d'Italia, Chicago, So you see what I was telling you before about the news and how news traveled even in a time of no social media. Okay, 10 italiani scannati a New Orleans. Okay, the Secolo Illustrato della Domenica. This is in Italy. Okay, so this creates scandal. Italy and the US were on the verge of a war. The Italian Navy actually left the Italian ports and was ready to attack before President Harrison actually liquidated the whole matter with $25,000 in compensation to the families. In the meantime, with the stir all around the world for this, Teddy Roosevelt, Monday we dined at the Camerons. Various Dago diplomats were present, or much wrought up by the lynching of the Italians in New Orleans. Personally, I think it's rather a good thing, and said so. Teddy Roosevelt. This is the official position. Sociocultural consequences of what happened in New Orleans. Again, the PUC, March 25, 1891. Okay, New York, publication of New York. So you see the landscape is very complex. When you talk about the press, when you talk about the newspapers or magazines or journals or reviews, as you want to define them, they actually constituted the web of responding and corresponding, as it should be, points. Okay, they dialogue together. So to construct a picture, especially when it comes to racial matters, is quite difficult because of the extension of such web in a big country as the United States. Now the mafia enters the public discourse with the Hennessy case. Okay, sadly we don't have yet newspapers, Italian newspapers. La Voce Coloniale was published in the months of the Hennessy killing. Unfortunately, we don't have those issues yet. Hopefully, we can get our hands onto them and see how the local press and not the press in Chicago reacted to the killing of the chief and to the lynching of Italians. That's something that would be a massive coup to find. I don't know if you know this, but in 2019, Mayor Latoya Cantrell also apologized about. There was an official apology by the city of New Orleans. This should make our marker approach easier, because the historical commission should be, more than willing to accept an application for a marker, remembering a very controversial moment in the history of New Orleans. Also thanks to Mayor Cantrell, public apology. Now, there's another thing, though, and on this I'm going to conclude, that we haven't really talked about much, is also because I want to leave this for future talks and future things. I mean, I have to keep some cards, close to my chest somehow. But it's how did the Italians cope racially? I mean, what was their position? Because they repositioned, they suffered a massive attack in racial, ethnic, social terms after the Hennessy case. How did they cope? Well, one article here is more than enough, because Italians are often seen as being discriminated against, and it's true, they were, absolutely, no problem. Were regarded as not completely white, partly even closer to the African Americans than, like in Alabama, than they were to the whites. Well, the image they built in their own press, however, was often, very, very well defined on the one side of the color line, to the point to become incredibly racist. And this is another case of an Italian woman attacked by an African American. In the Elisabetta Castelli case down in Alabama, the outcome was tragic for the poor girl. In this case, she managed to defend herself. She managed to defend herself and shot the assailant, okay? And she was congratulated by the Voce Coloniale, saying, we congratulate Miss Baragona for her coolness and presence of mind in punishing the Negro who tried to attack her. Okay? This case, and this is astonishing. That's why I only offered you one, because I think it's more than enough to show very clearly where the Italians of New Orleans at some point in 1931, we're 40 years later, okay? So we're talking about 40 years later compared to the NSC case, where things were not looking so good for the Italians. Here, they positioned themselves not only on the white side of the spectrum, but in the racist side of the spectrum, saying this case reminds us the white race, so we're at the point of white supremacism here, keep the Negroes at distance, since in recent times it is considered, what is considered by us as humanity has been interpreted by them as equality. This, I gave you just one example of this kind because I thought it was more than enough as a preliminary finding to illustrate to you where the project is at this point. And I think this is in the redefinition of the studies in this field, this particular field, where a certain image of the Italians was given, only taking into account the nativist perspective. Well, this was the bit, the piece of the puzzle that we were missing, and the narrative offered by Italian newspapers is often quite different and quite surprising, and not always in a positive way. Thank you. And of course, if you have questions, now is the time. I think you might have one.
In your slide, a couple of slides back, there was a picture of a woman. I think it's a woman. No, go back again.
Yeah.
This one.
The mafia.
What's the significance of that picture? I don't understand it.
This is the mafia, okay? This is Lady Mafia, basically. Okay, so it's a representation. This is a good question, actually, because rhetorically speaking, okay, especially the female figure is often attached to an Italian culture serving to the motherland. Okay, Italy is represented as a woman with a crown. This is an inversion of that type of representation by the Puck, which is a magazine published in New York, so by the American nativist press. Okay, not particular nativist even, but the press. It's not. This is not a queen at all. This is a female criminal, pirate, brigand. I mean, it's a pirate-like type of thing, with mafia. Okay, with mafia written there. Okay, attempting with a sword and a gun the jury box. Okay, because why were the Italians acquitted? Not because they were innocent. Because the mafia, the black hand of the mafia, put its fingers on the jury box and corrupted them. This is quite funny, in a city like New Orleans, in 1891, New Orleans, I mean, corruption was everywhere. The pure Italians were, but the only corrupted one and able to corrupt the jury, and jurors were the Italians, the mafia. That's why this case is also very relevant, because it allows this type of imagery and of rhetorics to become part of the public domain. And the reaction now, of course, I simplified things a bit, but after 40 years, it doesn't have to surprise us that Italians took that stance. The racial reaction, such a massive, a strong racial reaction in words, but also in facts, we must imagine, against the African-American population. Okay, in this case was a criminal act, but has to be seen as a reaction to this type of rhetoric. Okay, a rhetoric that for 40 years, for 30 years, 20 years before, in any case, has depicted the Italians as mafiosi, as criminals. So there was this type of reaction, especially after Mussolini took power, so there was a boost, okay, in the Italian societies, in Italian communities to, you know, to put their heads out there and show their patriotism and their pride in being Italian. That became too much. You know, usually rhetoric, as usual, you know, tends to, there's the hyperbolic rhetorical moment that comes out, and that's one of those. You know, they had to assert their being part of the white society to the point of becoming incredibly racist as a reaction to this type of representation that had been going on forever.
Thank you.
Matteo, first, thank you very much for this very rich. I was struck, and I want to hear your opinion. So the term la voce coloniale, okay, so starting in the 19th century, by colony was meant a migrant group. So Italians that migrated around the world, but especially in the Americas, of course, were considered colonies.
Yes.
I find it fascinating how the colonists, meaning Italian migrants and the Americans, became part of the colonial project of the fascist regime in the 1930s that was meant for Africa, you know, to send Italians to Africa and colonize African, especially Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, at the Corn of Africa. So I wonder whether you can tell us a little bit more, for what you've studied and what you've seen, the connection, because you think of here the migrant groups being completely separated from Italy, but really were part, and whether this newspaper, through the Italian propaganda, also filtered some of the ideas that were becoming part of the colonial project of Italy in the 1930s. In Philadelphia, very few people know, but in Philadelphia there is a gorgeous fountain, unfortunately often without water, that is a replica of a fountain of the Borghese, Villa Borghese in Rome, that was given as a gift by the fascist government for the 150th anniversary, so it was 1926, here in the United States, and as to honor the Italian community in the Philadelphia area. So there was, and this is 1926, so it's very early. There's a real awareness in Rome, the fascist government, which was not there with the pre-fascist Italian governments, of the importance of the migrant colonies as a way to map out this idea of Italy that is not just on the Italian peninsula, but in different parts of the world.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you more. Now, I showed you before the image of you know, in the slide about the public history component. You know, we all clubbed together. I mean, the Marie Curie project, the Alberta Center, the La Motta Chair, and the University of Padua, to create a marker for Primo Bartolini. What you said is so true. At some point, especially during the fascist years, and the apex of the whole thing, you know, the top of of it all was touched after the conquest of Addis Ababa. Then the colonies finally realized they were part of a proper empire, okay, which they've always felt like, in a way, even before you know, this happened, this physically, factually happened. So the sentiment was already there. The idea of the piccola patria, okay, the idea of you know, a kind of closing the neighborhood's doors in the face of the others in order to assert their own, you know, which is a normal, I think, attitude of many migrant communities. You know, their belonging to the homeland is often projected into the new land by, you know, closing up and you know, the doors and you know, establishing even closer ties to the homeland. This was particularly true as far as Italy is concerned. Well, and it usually happens in general around key moments. You know, in Italy, it also happens in 1919 when D'Annunzio takes Fiume. When the nuncio takes fiume, cablograms or the nuncio's poems and exhortations to support the cause of Italy, trying to take back what was Italy's, were an everyday kind of thing. So around key moments, this has always been the case. During the in 1935-36, there's even more than that. Primo Bartolini, again, we're sponsoring the marker, Primo Bartolini together. Primo Bartolini was part of, came up with an idea. Primo Bartolini was the first non-Italian, non-African American to teach. So the first white to teach into schools for African Americans in Nashville. Okay, and he said, well, I don't know if this was. I still have to look into the matter. Mussolini was, as many at the time close to the fascist regime, believed in Mussolini's actions and acts of conquest abroad. Mussolini was the one who gave Italy the long-awaited for empire, the longed-for empire. And Bartolini said, well, I'm a teacher of Italian. I'm going to teach African Americans. And he said the government had given him instructions to teach the African Americans Italian so that they could be, part of the empire and sent back and sent to, colonize, so be part of the colony, of the Italian colony by language in Nashville, to be sent back, because of course racial affinity according to Mussolini's racial project, we have to think, they could be sent back to the Horn of Africa to colonize, once more, it's a meta-colonization in a way, the local. So what you say is so true that, even these kind of lunatic projects, come up, but, it was something, but the idea there was to make the local African Americans of Nashville part of the Italian colony by teaching them the language. That was interesting. Yes.
Yes, I'm glad that you put that sign up there that says Italian Catholic.
Yes.
It's talking about the South now, and in particular, the Protestants of the South and the Ku Klux Klan, very powerful. We're talking about anti-Black, but also anti-Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
So what did you discover in your research with regard to the church, our faith, and what is going on in the dynamic with regard to the African-American population, Italians being rejected by the Protestant whites and the Ku Klux Klan?
How many hours do I have to answer this? This is a very good question. This is a very good question. But yes, you can imagine. First of all, when I managed to find the Italian Catholic cemetery there, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere. So I arrived there, and funnily enough, there used to be a church there. Now it was founded in 1901 because the local Baptist would not bury. I think he was a child who died, and he couldn't find any burial site. So the local Italians had to basically establish a church. I think it's St. Andrew's Church, consecrate, get the bishop to consecrate an area next to it, adjacent to it, to have their own cemetery. Okay, so that's the birth of this thing in 1901. When I arrived there a few years ago, the church has not been there for ages now. Okay, there's still I think the hilltop where we used to be is still a property of the church, but the cemetery is still there, and it's maintained by some a group of local Italians. And he was kind of honored with this. This is not really a historical marker. It's something that they put there to tell people there is a Catholic cemetery. It was on the other side of the hill when I arrived, so I didn't even see this thing. And I came to it on the other side. On the other side, funnily enough, there's another cemetery. So when I arrived, I saw tombstones and a couple of people there, bringing flowers to their dear ones. And I stopped by. I said, "Well, is this the Catholic cemetery?" And this guy turned to me and said, "Are you joking? Are you trying to find a Catholic cemetery in the Bible Belt? An Italian Catholic cemetery here?" And I found it. It was in the other side of the hill. But so yes, this is to say that more than with African Americans, the problem there, and you touched on, obviously that's an open, very much open case for scholars. In the history of Alabama is made through the history of the Baptist churches, of course, and there's also cases. There's a historical case. There's a beautiful book titled "Rising Roads," which is all about it's a true story. The subtitle, I think, is a true story of blood, race, and religion. Where a Catholic priest is murdered. Catholic priests were murdered. I mean, so in terms of how the Catholic faith fared in the area, well, that's a I would call it a kind of worms, in scholarly, not so much scholarly terms, but to try and find, to study the dynamics in the papers. There's a few of these things. Certainly, one thing that the newspapers did was to introduce, in the public discourse, devotions that came right from Sicily, San Calogero, a black saint from Sicily. Okay, it was imported. Okay, and the devotion of San Calogero became, a very widespread and open, an en plein air kind of devotion that was accepted. How well, we don't know, by the locals. I mean, because the Italians at some point became part of the social fabric and the financial and the cultural fabric of Birmingham, especially, so much so that they had to accept it in a way. So,
but then a follow-up, if you go across the border from Alabama into, well, that would be Mississippi, into Louisiana, you've got a French Catholic presence there. Did the French Catholics and the French Church in Louisiana accept the Italian and the Italian Catholic Church in Louisiana?
Well, in Louisiana, it was a bit easier. There were also the orders there. There were a few orders, the Ursulines as well. So there was some kind of. It was easier than in Alabama. This is an aspect that I haven't yet started to study. In Nashville, there were the Dominicans. So there were certainly pockets. Right. Just as a student who wanted to very quickly.
Question, yes,
yeah.
and then we can continue.
Yes.
You can ask question before. Go ahead.
Through my studies and the opportunity to go through my studies and the opportunity to go abroad, I was able to learn and experience firsthand the differences between the north and the south of Italy. So specifically with respect to opportunity, which resulted in a lot of the immigration, as you said earlier in your presentation, to come from southern Italy. So my question is, was this feeling of being a deeper shade of white a united feeling between Italians, or was it specifically the southern Italians?
It's difficult. I mean, we'll need to talk to the actual people, and it's something that I've done. I mean, I've tried to start some oral history thing. I mean, there's few people in their 90s who were there when the first communities were established. The first little Italies were established. And they're still around, very much around. I never had, talking to them, because I like to talk about facts, because I can make, of course, my deductions or inductions about, from the documents that we have, we don't really see it as an issue from the Italians, as to being as you define them. Of course, there was a perception of not being particularly welcome, in certain areas, whether they came from the north or from the south. Also, because the north and the south divide was, in the eyes of the Americans, as you've seen from the Dillingham Report, a rather different thing compared to what the Italians would perceive of themselves. Someone from Liguria would not perceive, themselves as a southerner, as the Americans would. So, it's difficult to answer that question because it's a very interesting one. It's a very interesting one because we would need to hear from them whether there was this thing. My impression is that there was a kind of leveling when immigrants arrived. So in general, there was a barrier, especially after 1924. I mean, there was a massive barrier to immigration. So they would probably regard themselves as generally unwelcome or a cheap manpower, as it happens nowadays. Let's face it, in one way or the other. So I don't know if the white dimension added too much to that, but it's possible. It's a possibility, and it's certainly something that I'll be looking into.